The original Bioshock did so much more than take a generic first-person shooter and simply put it underwater. The game was a testament to the fact that the medium doesn't have to just provide the player with some gameplay mechanics to kill time, but can poetically weave its core experience around a richly detailed and engaging story. The gameplay and narrative elements complement each other perfectly and cemented Bioshock as an iconic title that will always be remembered. After all the countless positive reviews and almost universal praise that the game received, people began anxiously waiting to see if a sequel was going to be developed. Later on in 2010, Bioshock 2 was released to the world, and people didn't really know what to think of it. The game has its defenders, many people claiming that the gameplay was more refined and that certain aspects like the hacking and use of plasmids was significantly improved. However, Bioshock 2 has kind of become the red-headed stepchild of the series, with most people brushing it aside because the story isn't good. Now, during my first playthrough, I would have been tempted to agree. I did find the gameplay fun enough, and the novelty of playing as a Big Daddy was pretty engaging, but the plot didn't really grab me in any significant way. Even through to the end, I didn't really care all that much for the people that I should have, and I didn't dislike any of the antagonists as much as I was supposed to. However, during my second playthrough, I came to understand that this was much more of a flaw in regards to the writing of the characters, as opposed to the writing of the plot. On the surface, Bioshock 2 does seem a little unnecessary and a bit of a cash grab, but it did do something for me the second time around. If you haven't seen my video on the original Bioshock, I did mention that I had a very similar experience with the whole theme and message having a bigger impact on me during my second playthrough. And I do think that that's a testament to how good the writing in the Bioshock series is. You have a pretty surface level, easy to follow plotline, but once you actually dig deep and see what's underneath, there's a whole lot of interesting stuff to unearth. So let's talk about it. Bioshock 2 begins with little sister Eleanor on the hunt for Adam, with her big daddy and our protagonist, Subject Delta. We soon get attacked by some splicers and are rendered incapable of fighting back when one of the attackers uses the hypnotized plasmid. We then discover that the splicers were sent after us by Sophia Lamb, who was a psychiatrist in Rapture before its downfall and also Eleanor's real-life mother. She then hands us a pistol and forces us to shoot ourselves in the head as we're still under the effects of the hypnotized plasmid. Next thing we know, we wake up in a Vitus chamber 10 years later, 8 years after the events of the first game, and our only goal is to find Eleanor. This is pretty much the basis for the game's plot, just us roaming around looking for our missing child, while Lamb just sits in her office and preaches about how much better than us she is. Being back in Rapture feels just as breathtaking and as intriguing as it did the first time. The areas we traverse aren't really as memorable as those in the original game, but the visual detail and art style is still evocative of that same unique location that we love and remember. The first Bioshock was largely the vision of Ken Levine, the creative director at Irrational Software, and when asked about a sequel, it's safe to say that he wasn't really interested. In regards to making a second game, he said, "We felt we had said what we wanted to say about Rapture, about those kind of environments and that kind of feel." He wasn't really in the mindset that the story needed a continuation, but the publisher wanted a sequel, so development got passed to another studio, namely 2K Marin. So how'd it do? Was it unnecessary? Well, kind of. But what it brought to the table was definitely not a simple rehash of the original Bioshock. You could finish the first game, skip this one, and live a happy life. I don't think you'd be crippled with anxiety for fear of missing out on any crucial experience, but I do actually believe that Bioshock 2 builds upon the foundations that Bioshock 1 set out. As I mentioned in my previous video, Bioshock was themed heavily around the beliefs of Rapture's founder, Andrew Ryan. Ryan's character was essentially the personification of the philosophies of Russian-American writer Ayn Rand. Now, Rand was famous for her two best-selling novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, the latter having a heavy influence on the creation of Bioshock. But she was also recognized for developing on the idea of objectivism, the concept of self-interest and ethical egoism. In simple terms, it's every man for himself, and you should be sure to use whatever means necessary to better your own life. These beliefs made up Andrew Ryan's outlook on life and in turn inspired him to found Rapture in the first place. Now, Bioshock 2 somehow manages to maintain the same dark atmosphere as the original, but takes the focus to antithetical themes. Sophia Lamb is a villain with a complete opposite philosophy of Andrew Ryan. She is a fanatic in regards to utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is the belief of the greatest happiness principle, which was pioneered by John Stuart Mill. This philosophy states that the more pleasure and the least pain that an action causes, the better choice it is morally. It may be worth doing something that's considered bad if the ends justify the means. Try to pick the least bad option. It's like Spock said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But this causes a problem. If Lamb was indeed this great person of the people who always makes rational decisions that benefit as many people as possible, she wouldn't make for a very good villain. So naturally she's more of a narcissistic tyrant that uses her psychology skills to manipulate the people of Rapture and play them like pawns in a game of chess. She spent the best part of a decade telling the splicers what they want to hear and using them to do her dirty work, so I think it's safe to say she doesn't really practice what she preaches. She claims to want to put an end to ego, so her grand plan is to pump her own daughter full of Adam in hopes of creating a new divine, selfless being. A new utopia. But Lamb's actions don't exactly hold up with Mill's ideals. In his essay on liberty, Mill states the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection, that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So putting it plainly, the ends don't justify the means if it involves causing harm upon others. Even if Lamb's plan to turn Eleanor into some form of messiah was successful, she's not exactly sticking to her ideals. And I think that in the end she does realise that she's incapable of holding up to the ideals that she so vocally believes in. Some have described Lamb as altruistic, but I actually think that she fits into the whole utilitarianism angle a little bit better. Altruism is described as the maximization of positive consequences for everybody, save for the actor. This could be a room of people, a family, or a small group. Utilitarianism is very similar, but places its focus more on bettering society as a whole. While similar, there could be a few situations where the ideals of altruism and utilitarianism run at odds with each other. The latter is more of a philosophical and political ideal, whereas the former is more of a personal outlook on life. An altruist is likely to sacrifice their own happiness to improve the life of a friend or family member, but they're probably not going to make that same sacrifice for a room full of strangers. We find out during the events of Bioshock 2 that Lamb discovered the secret of Frank Fontaine's mind control from the first game. What's interesting is that the whole Would You Kindly project was a big shift in Andrew Ryan's ideals. He was a firm believer of free will and a man's right to act and speak as he pleases, but in the end does end up using Would You Kindly against Jack. He turned his back on his own philosophy, and afterwards the game's whole theme sort of becomes rather nihilistic. Lamb, however, saw Would You Kindly as an act of perfect altruism. She believed that if one was able to control another from word of mouth alone, great things could be accomplished for the greater good for all of Rapture, even if that means reducing one man's life to simply being a passenger in his own body. This is why I now realise that Sophia Lamb is actually a better villain than I originally thought. I initially believed that she was a poorly written imitation of the first game's antagonist, and found it quite annoying. I got the vibe that she loves the sound of her own voice, and that she just would not shut up, constantly playing moral superiority. And while she still has nowhere near the character depth that Ryan does, I now believe Lamb to be a rather misunderstood villain. If Bioshock 2 was the only game in the franchise, and Lamb was our sole antagonist, I could understand the criticism a whole lot more, but I think where she really comes into her own is that her ideals and philosophies actually build upon the original games rather well. Bioshock 2 is a sequel that retains the gameplay that worked from the original while refining it to near perfection, but then takes the narrative and says, okay, So you've seen Rapture under the control of this man with these very primal and self-fulfilling ideals, so now we have Rapture being controlled by this lady who appears to be an amalgamation of everything that the first leader stood against. Lamb is Ryan's polar opposite, yet they both end up being their respective game's primary antagonist. When we enter Rapture at the start of the original game, the city's been under the control of Ryan since its inception. The place is a nightmarish hellscape that's been crumbling at the seams for years. This is the result of Andrew Ryan's personal philosophy. He built what he envisioned, and this is how it ended up. Now, an interesting thing to note is that we never actually get to see the result of Lamb's master plan, since we defeat her at the end of the game. But this is interesting because it leads us to a bit of a difficult question. Was she right? For all we know, her plan to pump Eleanor full of Adam and create a new utopia could have worked. Very unlikely, as the whole plan is mental, but it's interesting and kind of tragic from her perspective that she never got the chance to see her plans come to fruition. Despite the city still being a bit of a wreck, the splices that you encounter in Bioshock 2 do seem to be a little more civilized than those in the original game. Ryan had left the city to fend for itself while he stayed up in his penthouse, and all of the splicers were sort of scavengers, either fighting to survive or to get their next fix of Adam. In this game, the splicers seem to be working together under the rule of Sophia Lamb. She has managed to get people to come together for what she perceives as the greater good. Obviously, it doesn't do them much good since most of them meet their end for simply following blind faith. Now, I think that is the interesting thing to take from Bioshock 2. Whilst mostly a result of Lamb's manipulation, the people of Rapture seem doomed to suffer terrible fates as punishment for placing their trust so easily in whoever is in the position of most power at that particular time. Something to take away from this is that while Ryan and Lamb seem to have polar opposite views and opinions on how man should be able to live, neither one of them is technically right. Even the little sisters blindly believe their paired Big Daddy is their father and will always be there to protect them. When you actually get to play as a little sister towards the game's climax, you'll notice that the dark, depressing aura of Rapture isn't even something that the sisters can comprehend. They see everything in a positive little bubble, with warm tones and colours and gold statues scattered throughout. And before anyone says anything, I know that you could put this down to them being naive little kids and the fact that they're super juiced up on Adam, even being mind controlled to a point, but my point still stands. Blind faith will only end up hurting you. You should choose to put your faith in those that matter to you. Bioshock 2 doesn't make use of the same mind control twist from the first game to justify why the player follows on-screen objectives without question. Subject Delta follows the objectives because his only goal and desire is to get back to Eleanor. She is what drives his intentions and actions throughout the game. The message of Bioshock 1 seemed to be a pure form of criticism towards Ayn Rand's objectivism philosophy. Andrew Ryan's ideals backfired on him and sent Rapture into chaos. The message in Bioshock 2 seems to shun not necessarily the concept of altruism, but the people who poorly implement it to their lives. It takes a satirical look at pseudo-utilitarians and criticises the people who falsely claim to care for and put others before themselves, and then proceed to poorly implement the idea in reality. It also discourages blindly but willingly placing your faith in others for seemingly mindless reasons. Utilitarianism is a nice idea, putting the benefits of the people as a community above the needs or desires of a single person. But sometimes we're forced to make hard decisions that nobody really wants to make. There isn't always a binary black or white choice. Sometimes you can't care for everybody. But what we should all strive for is just to be good people. Be the best we can be. Care for the ones we love and the ones who make us who we are. We can't really be selfish, after all, no monster alive turns the other cheek. But we can put our all into caring for our friends and our family. Remember, love is just a chemical. No matter the origin, we give it meaning by choice. Hey everybody, thank you all very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed. I think it's safe to say that when I started Bioshock 2, I definitely didn't think I would have as much to say about it as I did. But I'm actually glad it did. It made me think a lot more about it. I thought based on the reception that it had, it was just going to be a bit of a cash grab, but it did have something to say. And I hope this video kind of put my thoughts and feelings into an easy to understand format, and that you guys kind of got what I was trying to say. But that's it from me. If you did like this video, be sure to just give it a like and subscribe for more stuff, and I'll probably see you in the next one. See ya.